Washington Commanders veterans report to training camp today, and star wide receiver Terry McLaurin is still waiting for a contract extension. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Rays Hail Report. I'm your host, Matthew Heiserman, and today we are joined by ESPN senior NFL insider Jeremy Fowler to get the latest scoop on Terry McLaurin's looming deal and much more. Jeremy, it's great to have you on.
Hey, Matthew, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And getting right into it, I kind of just want to start with my prediction for what this McLaurin deal is going to look like.
Yeah.
I have it as a 3-year, $102 million deal, 34 mil per year with 70 mil guaranteed. Because we saw Garrett Wilson get just about 3 years guaranteed, just under 3 years guaranteed on a
Yeah.
4-year deal. So maybe we look at, just over 2 years guaranteed on a 3-year Terry McLaurin deal. What do you think we can expect to see from this deal financially? And, how realistic is that prediction that I just gave you?
Yeah. I think he would take that deal. That's a good deal for the
Mhm,
player. I don't
mhm,
think Washington would do that deal right now. I
mhm,
think that's part of the issue and why we're here.
mhm.
Like you're alluding to, the receiver market is above $30 million now, or at least around
Yeah.
it. The low end would be what Brandon Ayuk did,
Mhm.
which he was right at $30 million last year, or T. Higgins, I guess, would be on the lower
Yeah.
end for like really good receivers, maybe not guys in the top five or that Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson class, but somewhere outside of it.
Mhm,
T. Higgins is at 28.5 million a year. So
mhm,
certainly Terry McLaurin sees himself above that and probably sees him above some of these players that are getting this big
mhm,
money. He just, my understanding is he just wants a deal commensurate with his skill set in the current market as it stands, where
mhm.
part of the frustration is Washington has not been able to get in that range or has not been comfortable with that. As far as I know, uh, they're just looking at more of like a slight increase from where he's at.
Mhm,
And this is where you get into difficult conversations about a player in his third contract. The
mhm.
team can try to hold that against him a little bit, where he can say, hey, I'm still in my 20s and I'm at my very best. So I think cooler heads will prevail on this eventually. But right now it's still sticky, and we're just trying to figure out if he's actually going to be at camp. That's
Mhm.
the looming question right now.
Absolutely, and I know that, Adam Peters and Dan Quinn actually have a press conference going right now. I don't know if they're gonna bring up Terry
Yeah,
McLaurin's extension at all
yeah,
during that, but, I mentioned this during the intro, Commanders veterans report to training camp today.
yeah.
When is it time for Commanders fans to panic, considering that McLaurin. We got you?
Yeah, sorry about that. So not
No.
time to panic yet.
Mhm,
There's
mhm,
still a lot of time. Even if Terry misses a couple weeks of camp, like it's Terry McLaurin, he's a true pro. He's keeping himself ready.
mhm,
I wouldn't worry too much about that. If you get closer to week one and he's either not there or there's not a deal or maybe he shows up and is holding in, which means he's
mhm.
not doing anything, but he's at
Yeah.
camp. Uh, if you go through camp and through the preseason games and he's still not signed and he's still frustrated, then you have an issue.
Mhm,
But I think that's a long ways away as we sit here in late July. There's still a lot of time. So I tend to not think teams need to panic on these issues.
mhm.
Negotiations are always tough. And at the end of the day, he's really their only, outside of Debo Samuel, of course, but he's their only primary option that you can hang your hat on and say, this is a premier guy that we can throw
Yeah.
to. You know, um, with all respect to guys like Zach Ertz, who are very good players, but
Mhm,
they're 34 years old in their mid 30s. Debo Samuel hasn't really been the same player he was. Terry's the guy, and he's coming up a 13 touchdown season. And you
mhm.
have a good team that can compete for a
Yeah.
division title and compete in the playoffs. So you need McLaurin there. That's why I think at the end of the day they'll find a way to figure this out. It's been a little uglier than I thought it would.
Mhm. And then last Tuesday, McLaurin spoke to the media about this extension for the first time,
Yeah.
stating that he was frustrated with the lack of communication between him and Washington. What do you make of those statements? Should we be concerned with the lack of progress that we've seen so far?
I mean, it's mildly concerning.
Mhm.
Now, deadlines like today can create some urgency. Sometimes around the
Yeah.
start of camp or that first week, teams are more in business mode. they feel the frustration that Terry feels a little bit, so they want to try to work something out. So we'll see if that creates some momentum here. Yeah, the lack of communication is tricky. I,
Mhm.
not certainly. I do take him at his word. I had heard that the way it was told to me was that there hadn't been any meaningful discussions. Now that doesn't mean that the
Mhm.
team might have checked in at some point, or if you ask Washington, they'll say like, well, you don't think we want to talk to one of our very best players and a
Mhm.
team captain?
Yeah.
Of course we do. So
Mhm.
it is semantics to an extent, but I still go back to the line I was told that the lack of meaningful discussions was the issue. So,
Mhm.
I don't know that even leading back to when Terry made his comments publicly that Washington had made like a firm offer that was realistic. I just think there was a ways to go at that point. And as we stand here right this minute, I don't know how much has changed, but I imagine they've had
Mhm.
at least some talks.
Mhm. And then, with Terry showing this frustration, I don't even know if we're close to this, but,
Yeah,
is there a chance we see a potential trade request at some point? I saw a report from Henry McKenna yesterday that was basically saying McLaurin's willing to do,
yeah.
whatever he can to get this deal, even if that means potentially joining a new team. Is that
Yeah.
an actual outcome that we could see happen? And are there any teams that have shown lots of interest in potentially acquiring McLaurin?
So as it stands now, I don't see that as realistic. Now,
Mm,
I know from Terry's side, the sense I get is that anything is possible.
mhm,
So the implication there is that a trade request could be on the table at some point if this continues to go poorly. Uh, Based on Terry's importance to the team and how embedded he is in Washington, it would have to go really, really badly for him to do that, I think.
mhm,
Now, I was told that Washington has no plans to trade McLaurin, so I believe that. Things can change certainly, but I don't expect them to try to trade him. There would certainly
mhm.
be interest for sure. I mean, look at a team like New England that was
Yeah.
willing to overpay for Chris Godwin in March during free agency. They have Stephon Diggs, but he's sort of year to year and has the injury. So I think they would welcome the chance to get a guy like that. And there are others too. I mean, he would have
Mhm,
multiple suitors, I believe. But the
mhm.
problem now with trades, and you saw it a little bit around the Myles Garrett and T.J. Watt
Yeah.
discussions. Even though those are two of the very, very best players in the NFL, teams are having a hard time giving up like a first round pick and more for
Mhm,
like a big premium package of picks to then turn around and have to pay these really large sticker shock prices for some of these players. So, like for instance, if you would have traded for TJ Watt, which
yeah.
never was really going to happen, but you would have to give up probably a first round pick and more and then pay him $40 million a year on a
Mhm.
3 year deal. That's just tough for teams to do. So, that's something to keep in mind with McLaurin. For as good as he is, those trades are hard to make right now because of the
Mhm.
money.
So what do you think Washington's urgency looks like to get this deal done right now? Do you think they want to get it done within the next week? How much of a rush are they in, and how much pressure has McLaurin recently put on them to get this deal done?
Yeah.
Where are they at with this
I,
negotiation?
yeah, I would say that Washington hasn't shown the need to rush. I think in part
Mhm,
because they don't love the quarterback market, excuse me, the wide
mhm,
receiver market and how high
yeah,
it's gone. I think that
mhm,
has affected the team a little bit where that's my sense at least right now, they just
mhm,
don't want to acknowledge that or pay that. Now, certainly that could change based on their desire to keep him and get him in the fold and get this all wrapped up. I just haven't sensed a whole lot of urgency that the player is receiving from the team. That's pretty clear at this point. So that's one thing that does have to change.
and then what would you say is the main holdup that's, caused for the lack of progress over the past few weeks?
Yeah, so the main holdup really, as far as I understand it, is Terry looks at where the receiver market is now, which is
Mhm,
reflective of what Garrett Wilson got, which is around $30 million a year on a what was it, a 4 year deal.
mhm,
So he's looking at that. He's saying, "Hey, I'm a more accomplished, probably better player than Garrett Wilson,
mhm,
even though Garrett Wilson is younger."
yep,
And so the market is what it is. It should be pretty clear to do. Where the team, at least based on indications they've given from the players, I understand it as they'd be willing to, slightly increase his pay where he's at now. I think he's at 23 million. But they're not looking at that range, that market, as putting him in there, even though that's probably going to have to be what happens,
Mhm.
just the way these things are going and the kind of player Terry is. So it's a standard disagreement in where the market is or what the team's willing to pay
Yep.
versus what the player feels like they're worth. And so, these things lead to different strategies. Terry's strategy has been to speak out,
Mhm.
in his own diplomatic way. Trey Hendrickson did that in Cincinnati too. You saw that.
Mhm. Yep.
Sometimes you just have to apply a little pressure to try to get the
Mhm.
ball moving.
Mhm. And then you kind of touched on this, but obviously Wilson, when you're playing that comparing game, Wilson's the younger receiver. Um, when wide receivers turn 30 years old, which Terry will be turning 30 in September, sometimes that's when we see them have a slight decrease in production.
Yeah.
Do you think that's a potential holdup in this deal in terms of the fact that maybe Terry wants a 4-year deal, knowing that this will be the final major contract of his career, while Washington is
Yeah.
more set at giving him a 3-year deal?
Well, certainly, I think Terry would take a 3-year deal. A lot of these players
Mhm,
want shorter deals if they can get good guarantees and good money, because
mhm.
if you do a
Yeah.
4-year or 5-year deal, the team can cut you on the back end of a non-guaranteed year. So you saw it with TJ Watt. He got a 3-year deal at around $40 million a year, and it's pretty ironclad. Like he's gonna get paid for those 3 years.
Yeah.
Where certainly I think Terry would be welcome to that as well. So I don't know if number of years is as important as just making sure you secure a lot of money up, not only up front but through the first couple years of the contract. And yeah, this is his last crack most likely at a big contract. So he wants to hit it out. But your point about guys going into third contracts is a good one because teams do try to hold that against players, and I do think that's what's happening
Mhm,
here. And if you're Terry, you said, "Hey, I just scored 13 touchdowns. I'm at my very
mhm.
best, and I'm still
Yep.
pretty young." Like I have if you're Terry, you're saying I have at least several years of good
Yeah.
football left.
Yeah.
So they're going to have to find a sweet spot in that regard.
Now, moving away from this extension, just two questions I have before we wrap things up. Obviously, you've been working recently on your top 10 players at every position. As we get closer to the season, always a great read. But, on July 16th, you put out an article where over 70 executives, coaches, scouts ranked the top 10 wide receivers across the NFL. McLaurin ended up being the first honorable mention
Yeah.
outside of the top 10. What kind of separated him from being in the top 10? Why didn't he get that spot?
Yeah, he probably should have, to be honest, because I had to go to a tiebreaker with several receivers.
Mhm,
Puka Nakua was one, Terry McLaurin, and Garrett Wilson, who got that 10 spot.
mhm,
So it's really about preference. Garrett Wilson got the vote because I think with his age and his upside
mhm,
and the fact that he's really good at separating from a cornerback, like he's really explosive of an athlete, where Terry's a better player. I think almost everyone in the league would agree that he's a better player.
mhm,
But if you're picking guys right now that you can do something with, Garrett maybe offers a little more juice in that regard. So
mhm.
it was a very close call. Terry very well could have been the 10th receiver. So to me, he's 10B or 10A, and that costs a lot of money, if you're a proven
Mhm.
guy like that. So that's why I suspect they'll get something done eventually.
And then the other player I want to talk about is Jaden Daniels, who placed
Yeah.
fifth among all quarterbacks. There's no doubt that Daniels was probably the fifth best quarterback, maybe even higher than that last season, just based off his production. But then you look at the list last year, and you obviously CJ Stroud, who was seventh. You know, I guess, do you feel confident or comfortable putting Daniels on that list before seeing his year 2 campaign after seeing the sophomore slump that CJ Stroud took this past season?
Yeah, I even asked some evaluators about that very concept, and
Mhm,
they could certainly see at times Washington struggling with, maybe teams adjust to Cliff Kingsbury's offense, or maybe just defenses sometimes catch up to a player a little bit because they have a whole offseason game plan for him. But that said, not a lot of people are expecting a dip from Daniels and only expect him to get better. He's got more weapons around him
Mhm.
this year than he did a year ago. He's got probably a better
Yeah.
offense pound for pound with adding Debo Samuel and Laramie Tunsil. The offensive line should be a little bit better. I mean, what he did last year with really Terry McLaurin, a 34-year-old tight end, a bunch of receivers they were paying low money
Mhm.
to acquire, and an average offensive line, and took him to the NFC Championship game. So it's
Mhm.
just kind of
Yeah.
crazy what he did. So people see Daniels a little bit as a cut above C.J.
Mhm.
Stroud. Even though Stroud, I expect him to get back in the top 10. He just
Yeah.
had a rough year with what was around him. It wasn't all his fault. So, certainly that can happen when you're dealing with 11 players on a field. Daniels could have moments where he's struggling a little bit uh, because of what's happening around him. But people keep going back to this. He can throw to all three levels of the field.
Mhm.
He can kill you with his legs, and he's just incredibly poised and a great decision maker. And he's one of those like 5 a.m. workers, shows up really early in
Yeah.
the morning, puts in the work. So he's got a formula for success that should translate.
And I think Stroud was never really considered to have had a historic rookie season. It was really just
Yeah,
compared maybe to Bryce Young, especially who was the first overall pick. Just seeing how he outperformed Bryce Young. But when you look
yeah,
at Daniel's completion percentage, when you look at some of the moments he had last year leading this team to the NFC Championship game for the first time since the 1991 season, I think it's definitely deserving. Now, I do have, one final thing I want to take a look at before we wrap things up. Chase's Sports News in the chat. Jeremy, huge fan. Question: can we see Washington potentially sit back and let this linger and have McLaurin sit out during this upcoming season?
I'd be surprised. The only way I
Mhm.
see that is if they're just taking a hard stand financially or going to
Yeah.
wait for him to cave. Um, this front office does operate with conviction with GM Adam Peters.
Mhm.
I don't think they're just trying to throw money around. They are being judicious
Yeah.
where they can um, to save money. I think they're trying to look at the bigger picture here. So, but he's just too important of a player where I think they will act with some urgency eventually.
Mhm. With that being said, I can't thank you enough for coming on. Is there anything else you want to say to the people watching before we wrap things up?
No, I don't think so. Just keep doing what you're doing, man. Enjoy your show, and thanks for having me on.
I really appreciate it. If you made it up to this point, make sure you like and subscribe completely free. Helps out the channel a lot. Again, I'm Matthew Heisman alongside Jeremy Fowler on the Raise Hail Report. And as always, we will see you next time.